The morning Gerald Whitfield walked into Hargrove's Steakhouse on Fifth Avenue, he had not spoken a real word to another human being in 11 days. Not counted the coffee order at the corner deli, the clipped "hold it" to the elevator doors, the 2-word email responses his assistant forwarded to clients on his behalf. Those weren't words. Those were functions. Gerald Whitfield, 61 years old, founder of Whitfield Capital Management, owner of a 14-room penthouse on the Upper East Side, had not truly spoken to another person in 11 days, and some mornings he woke up wondering if he ever would again. He had a table at Hargrove's every Thursday, window seat east-facing, where the November light came in flat and gray and suited his mood. The matron knew his order before he sat down. Bone-in ribeye, medium rare, black coffee, no dessert. He tipped well and smiled never, and nobody bothered him. And that was the arrangement that had served Gerald Whitfield just fine for the better part of 3 years, ever since his wife Marlene passed, and his son moved to Portland, and stopped returning calls with any regularity. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, actually reading it, not scrolling, because he was 61 and believed paper still meant something. When the girl walked in, she didn't come through the front door. That was the first thing he noticed. She came through the service entrance at the back, which opened onto the kitchen corridor, and he only saw her because his table was near enough to the hallway that the door swinging open caught his eye. She was small, maybe 11, maybe 12, in that in-between age where kids carry both the softness of childhood and the first hard angles of something else. She wore a blue puffer jacket 2 sizes too big, the kind with a broken zipper held together with a safety pin. Her jeans had a tear at the left knee that was not the fashionable kind. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a lopsided ponytail, and she was carrying a backpack so stuffed it made her lean forward slightly as she walked, like a little ship fighting the current. She was also completely, utterly lost. Gerald watched her scan the room with the particular stillness of a child, trying very hard not to look frightened. She checked a piece of paper she pulled from her jacket pocket, looked up at the restaurant, checked the paper again. Whatever she was looking for, she hadn't found it. A busboy nearly walked into her and muttered something under his breath, and she pressed herself against the wall to let him pass, shoulders coming up around her ears. Gerald looked back at his paper. He read the same paragraph 3 times. He looked up again. She was still there, still pressed against the wall, and now her lower lip had the particular tightness of someone deciding, very seriously, whether or not to cry. Gerald Whitfield had not intervened in a stranger's situation in longer than he could recall. He was not, as Marlene had often gently observed, a man who inserted himself. He was a man who evaluated, considered, and then typically decided the situation was not his concern. It had served him well in business. In life it had left him eating alone at Hargrove's on Thursdays. He set down his paper. "Hey," he said. She looked up sharply, the way kids do when they expect to be told to leave. "You looking for somebody?" She considered him for a moment with large, serious brown eyes. Not scared exactly, more like she was running a calculation. "I'm looking for the community lunch," she said. Her voice was steadier than her lip had been. The flyer said this address. Every Thursday. Gerald knew about the community lunch. Hargrove's hosted it, had for years, one of those charitable arrangements the owner used for his taxes and occasionally mentioned in the local press. It was held in the private dining room downstairs, not the main floor. He was fairly sure it started at noon and it was currently 11:40. "Downstairs," he said. "Take the stairs by the coat check, but it doesn't start for 20 minutes. She looked at the stairs, looked at the door. He could see her doing the math on whether to wait in the cold outside or stand here in the hallway where the busboy had already looked at her like she was an inconvenience. "You can sit," he said, and he wasn't sure exactly why he said it. He gestured at the empty chair across from him. "While you wait." Another calculation behind those eyes. "I don't have money," she said. Flat factual, not ashamed, just informational. "I didn't offer to sell you anything," Gerald said. "Sit down." She sat. She placed the backpack carefully between her feet and folded her hands on the table the way children do when they've been taught manners and have decided, in this particular moment, to deploy them. She looked out the window at Fifth Avenue, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable in the way Gerald would have expected. "What's your name?" he asked. "Rosie," she said. "Rosie Beaumont." "Gerald." He didn't offer his last name. "You come to the Thursday lunch often?" "Every week," she said. "Usually my grandma takes me, but she's got a bad ankle today. She know you came alone?" "She knows." Rosie pulled her ponytail over one shoulder and smoothed it, a fidgeting gesture. She wasn't happy about it. "But the 6 train runs right to 51st, and I've done it before." He looked at her backpack. "School stuff in there?" "Some." She paused. "And my grandma's library books. She can't get around good, so I return them for her. The branch on 53rd is on the way." Gerald picked up his coffee. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Some sob story, a request. But Rosie Beaumont was simply sitting there like she'd been invited to a meeting and was waiting for the agenda. "Are you hungry?" he said. She looked at him. "Now," he clarified. "Before the lunch downstairs. I'm okay. That's not what I asked." A pause. "Yes." He lifted one hand and the waiter materialized with the particular speed reserved for Gerald Whitfield's table. Gerald ordered her orange juice, a basket of sourdough, and the scrambled eggs, without asking, because she was 12, and there were things 12-year-olds wanted even when they didn't say so. When the bread arrived, she took a piece carefully, like she was being watched, and he looked back at his newspaper so she wouldn't feel that she was. She ate 3 pieces of bread. "Is there anything you don't like to eat?" he asked when the eggs arrived. She thought about it seriously. "Beets," she said, "and the kind of cheese that smells like a gym." Gerald almost smiled. He turned a page of the journal. "Me too," he said. They ate, or rather, she ate, and he pretended to read. And somewhere in the 30 minutes before the community lunch started, Gerald Whitfield learned the following things about Rosie Beaumont. She was 11 years old and in 6th grade at PS 158 on the Upper East Side. She was good at math and not good at anything involving a ball. She lived with her grandmother, a woman named June, who had bad ankles and strong opinions about the designated hitter rule. She had lived with her grandmother for 8 months, ever since her mother died. She said that last part, ever since her mother died, the same way she'd said everything else. Flat, factual, informational. Like she'd already done the work of making it a manageable fact and was not interested in revisiting the work. Gerald did not say he was sorry. He had been told he was sorry enough times after Marlene to know that the phrase carried less weight than people assigned to it. Instead, he asked what her mother had been like. Rosie considered this. "Funny," she said. She did impressions. She could do the Wicked Witch of the West really well. She demonstrated, briefly, tilting her voice into a credible cackle, and then she laughed at herself, and the laugh was so sudden and unguarded that something in Gerald's chest shifted sideways by about an inch. "She sounds like she was something," he said. "She was," Rosie said, and went back to her eggs. When a waitress came to tell them the community lunch was starting downstairs, Rosie wiped her mouth carefully with the linen napkin and folded it and put it back on the table. She picked up her backpack and stood. Then she paused. "Thank you," she said, looking directly at him. "For breakfast. You didn't have to do that." "I know," Gerald said. "Okay." She shifted the pack onto her shoulders. "Well, it was nice to meet you, Gerald." She said his name like it was a complete sentence. He watched her cross the restaurant toward the coat check and the stairs, small and listing slightly to the left under the weight of her grandmother's library books, until she disappeared around the corner. Gerald sat at his table for a long time after that. He didn't read the paper. He came back the following Thursday. He told himself it was because he always came on Thursdays, which was true. He told himself it had nothing to do with a kid in a broken zippered jacket who could do a credible Wicked Witch impression, which was less true. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on the bench by the coat check, backpack between her feet, reading a paperback with a cracked spine. She looked up. If she was surprised to see him, she organized her face quickly. "Hi, Gerald," she said. "Rosie," he said. He ordered his usual. When she came upstairs after the community lunch to return the borrowed napkin she'd apparently pocketed by accident, the waiter brought her a piece of apple pie without being asked, and Gerald looked at the ceiling as if he hadn't arranged that in advance. She ate it. She told him about a math test she'd done well on and a book report she was dreading. He told her that book reports were the same as quarterly earnings summaries, except you got to make up the numbers less. She considered this with great seriousness and asked if that was actually legal, and he said in his industry the answer changed depending on who was asking. She laughed again. That sideways shifting thing in his chest happened again. By the 3rd Thursday, she was sitting at his table when he arrived. By the fourth, the waiter had learned not to look surprised. Gerald's assistant, a brisk woman named Philippa, who had managed his calendar and his moods for 14 years, noticed that he was arriving at the office on Friday mornings in a different quality of quietness. Not the tight, shut-down silence that had settled over him after Marlene and had never fully lifted. Something else, something that had more air in it. She didn't say anything. Philippa was skilled at identifying which observations Gerald Whitfield would receive as information and which he would receive as intrusion, and she filed this one in the second category and waited. His son, Nathan, called on a Sunday in December, which was notable because Nathan called perhaps once a month on average and rarely on Sundays. They talked about the Portland rain and a promotion Nathan had been passed over for, and the Knicks' inexplicable roster decisions. Then Nathan asked, in the careful tone that meant he'd been working up to it, how his father was doing. Gerald thought about it honestly, which he didn't always do. Better, he said, lately. Nathan said that was good, and sounded like he meant it, and didn't ask what had changed, and Gerald didn't offer it, and it was perhaps the best conversation they'd had in 3 years. In the second week of January, Rosie came upstairs looking different. She sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table and looked at the salt shaker. Her jaw was set in the particular way that Gerald, over the past 2 months, had come to recognize as her managing something face. "What happened?" he said. She looked up. "How do you know something happened? You've been staring at the salt shaker for 45 seconds without touching it." A pause. "My teacher called my grandma," she said. "There was a thing at school, with some boys." She paused. "They said things about my jacket, the zipper." Gerald kept his face neutral. "What kind of things?" "The mean kind," she said simply. He looked at his coffee. He thought about 11-year-olds in broken zippered jackets who returned library books on the way to charity lunches and did their grandmother's errands and held themselves together with a straightness that most adults he'd met on Wall Street couldn't manage, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, which was an uncomplicated anger on behalf of another person. "Do you want to tell me their names?" he said. "Or would that be unhelpful?" She almost smiled. "Unhelpful. Fair enough." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Rosie, can I ask you something?" "Okay, the backpack, the jacket. Does your grandmother need help with things like that?" It was the most careful he'd spoken in years, maybe. He was aware of the distance between the intention and the words, and how easy it was to get that distance wrong. Rosie looked at him for a long moment. "We're okay," she said. "I didn't ask if you were okay," he said, and he heard himself echo his own words from November, and apparently so did she, because her mouth did a complicated thing. "She gets a check every month," Rosie said carefully. "It's enough, it's just, some months the roof is more than expected, or her ankle." "You know." "Yes," Gerald said, "I know." He didn't push it further that day. But 2 weeks later, a package arrived at PS 158 addressed to Rosie Beaumont from a company called GW Consulting Services, containing a new puffer jacket, dark green, good zipper, the right size, along with a note that said only, "For book returning weather, no returns accepted." He'd agonized over that note for an embarrassing length of time. She wore the jacket the next Thursday and didn't mention it, and neither did he, and somehow that was the right thing. The man's name was Darren Foote, and Gerald first heard it on a Thursday in February, when Rosie arrived 15 minutes late and sat down with the particular expression of someone who had been crying recently and was done with it now. Darren Foote, it emerged, was the brother of Rosie's late mother. He had appeared, after 8 months of complete absence, claiming that he was Rosie's family, and that Rosie should be living with him instead of with her grandmother, June. "Is that what you want?" Gerald asked. "No," Rosie said, with a flatness that settled the matter emotionally, if not legally. "He didn't even come to Mom's funeral. I met him twice. He smells like cigarettes and he looked at our apartment like he was counting things." Gerald processed this. Counting things. Like estimating. She folded her hands. "Grandma June has some good stuff. From my grandpa. A collection of coins, some antique clocks." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Has he spoken to a lawyer?" "He sent a letter." She reached into her jacket, the green one, and produced a folded piece of paper and put it on the table. Gerald looked at it. He did not touch it. "Rosie," he said carefully, "can I help you with this?" She looked at him across the table. In the gray February light, with the Fifth Avenue traffic moving behind her, she looked older than 11, and also, in some fundamental way, very young, and Gerald Whitfield, who had not felt necessary to anyone in 3 years, felt something reconstitute itself somewhere behind his sternum. "You're not family," she said, not unkindly, "just factual." "No," he said, "I'm not." She looked at the letter, then back at him. "But you know things. About legal things, business things." "I know people who know things," he said, "which is better." A long pause. "Okay," she said. Gerald's attorney was a precise, fast-talking woman named Harriet Cole, who had worked for him for 20 years, and who listened to the entire situation in under 4 minutes on the phone before saying, "Forward me the letter, and keep that man away from the grandmother's apartment." She called back in 2 days. Darren Foote had no legal standing that wasn't worth contesting. June Beaumont had been Rosie's legal guardian for 8 months with no challenge from the maternal uncle, who himself had a record, minor but present, and no stable income. The letter was, in Harriet's precise legal assessment, a bluff. "He's hoping June Beaumont doesn't have the resources to push back," Harriet said. "She does now," Gerald said. Harriet was quiet for a moment. "Gerald, who is this child to you?" He looked out at the Upper East Side from his office window. The November light was long gone. February had a different quality, harsher and cleaner. "Someone I eat breakfast with on Thursdays," he said. Harriet made a sound that wasn't quite a word and didn't press it. In the 3rd week of February, Gerald met June Beaumont. She was a small woman in her late 60s, copper-brown skin and white hair cut close to her head, seated in an armchair in a living room that contained 3 antique mantel clocks, exactly as Rosie had said, along with a remarkable quantity of library books, and a 7-year-old tortoiseshell cat named Biscuit, who regarded Gerald from the back of the sofa with profound suspicion. June regarded him similarly, though with more grace. "My granddaughter talks about you," she said, when Rosie had gone to put the kettle on. "More than I expected her to talk about anyone." "She talks about you too," Gerald said. "The ankle, the designated hitter." June's mouth curved. "I see she's given you the highlights." She studied him. "You're a wealthy man, Mr. Whitfield." "I am. Rosie doesn't need charity." "No," he said, "she doesn't. She needs a good lawyer for a specific problem, and I happen to know one. That's all I'm offering." June looked at him for a long moment, with the particular clarity of a woman who had seen enough of life to recognize sincerity when it appeared, and wasn't afraid to name its absence either. "She lost her mother in April," June said finally. "She came to live with me May 1st. She didn't cry for 3 weeks. Then she cried for about a month, off and on, and I let her. And then she stopped and she started returning my library books and doing her math homework and getting on the 6 train by herself." She smoothed the arm of her chair. "She's a remarkable child." "Yes," Gerald said. "She is." Something in June's eyes shifted. "You had children, Mr. Whitfield? A son?" "Grown." He paused. "My wife passed 3 years ago." June nodded, one of those small nods that contained a whole conversation about loss that didn't need to be had out loud. "Well," she said, "we'll have some tea." Harriet Cole sent Darren Foote a letter in early March, drafted with the particular precision that had made her the highest-billed attorney on Gerald's payroll for 2 decades. It outlined June Beaumont's legal standing in terms that left very little room for interpretation, and even less for negotiation. There was a paragraph near the end about the consequences of harassment of a minor that Gerald had specifically requested. Darren Foote did not respond. He also, as far as Gerald could determine, did not appear again. Harriet billed her hours, and Gerald paid them without looking at the total, which was a thing he had never done in 20 years of legal fees. And Harriet noted this and said nothing about it. The Tuesday after the Foote situation concluded, Gerald called his son Nathan. Not on a Sunday, a Tuesday unprompted. Nathan answered on the 2nd ring, which meant he'd been startled. "Dad, I wanted to tell you about someone," Gerald said. He told Nathan about Rosie. About the jacket with the broken zipper and the library books and the Wicked Witch impression, and the Thursday breakfasts and the math tests and the uncle and Harriet and the green jacket and June and the cat Biscuit, who still did not trust him, even after 4 visits. Nathan was quiet for a long time when he finished. "Dad," he said, that's a lot, I know. Are you okay?" Gerald thought about it honestly. He'd been doing that more lately, thinking honestly. "Yes," he said. "I think actually yes." Nathan exhaled. "When were you going to tell me this? I'm telling you now." "I want to meet her," Nathan said. "If that's, is that? What is this, exactly?" "What are you?" I don't know what to call it, Gerald said. She's my friend. She's 11, and she's my friend, and she returns her grandmother's library books, and she's very good at math, and she makes me feel like... He stopped. He searched for the right thing. Like there's a point to Thursday, he said finally. Nathan was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was different, lower, careful. Dad, he said. Marlene would have loved this. Gerald looked out the window at the February dark. Yes, he said. She would have. On the first Thursday of April, Rosie came upstairs from the community lunch and sat down across from Gerald and put something on the table. It was a photograph, printed on regular printer paper, a little blurry around the edges. A woman in her 30s, dark hair, Rosie's same serious brown eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. Something in the photo's quality suggested a phone camera, a spontaneous shot, the kind nobody takes on purpose. My mom, Rosie said. Gerald looked at it. She looks like you, he said. People always said that. Rosie picked up the photo and looked at it herself, and her face did something complicated and private that Gerald gave her room to do. I found this in a box when I was helping Grandma June clean out the closet. She turned the photo over. On the back, in small, looping handwriting, Rosie's going to have her laugh someday. Guarantee it. She wrote this? Gerald said. Yeah. Rosie turned it back over. She liked to write things on the back of photos. So you'd remember what she was thinking when she took it. She set it down on the table and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. I thought you might like to see her, since I talk about her. Gerald looked at the woman in the photo. He looked at the girl across the table from him. Thank you, he said, for showing me. Rosie nodded, businesslike. She picked up the menu even though she always ordered the same thing. It was a gesture he recognized, the way people pick something up to do something with their hands when they've just done something brave. I think I want the French toast today, she said. Then get the French toast, Gerald said. She got the French toast. In May, Nathan flew out from Portland for a long weekend. Gerald had not mentioned this to Rosie in advance, mostly because he was uncertain about his own motives and didn't want to build something up that might collapse under its own weight. But on Thursday he brought Nathan to Hargrove's. Rosie arrived from the community lunch, saw the unfamiliar man at Gerald's table and stopped. Rosie, Gerald said, this is my son, Nathan. Nathan stood up. He was 40 years old and had Gerald's height and Marlene's easier manner, and he reached out his hand, and Rosie shook it with the formality of someone who had been taught that handshakes mattered. My dad talks about you, Nathan said. Rosie looked at Gerald, something flickering in her expression. What does he say? That you're good at math, Nathan said. That you do your grandmother's library errands. That you can do the Wicked Witch voice. He paused. He didn't tell me about the voice. I can tell that was an oversight. Rosie looked at Nathan for a moment, assessing. Then she tipped her voice into the cackle, clean and committed, and Nathan laughed. A real laugh, his mother's laugh. The one Gerald hadn't heard in years. And Rosie smiled, the sudden, unguarded one, and something that had been broken for a very long time moved, quietly, toward its opposite. June's ankle worsened in June, which the doctor said was ironic, and June said was not helpful, and she required minor surgery and 2 weeks off her feet. Gerald arranged for a car service. He did not ask if this was acceptable. He simply had Philippa add June Beaumont's address to the account and told her the standing instruction was whenever she needs it. Philippa did not comment on this. She had, by this point, correctly identified the situation and was privately pleased about it. Rosie sent Gerald a text. She had his number now, had since February after the foot situation, that said simply, Grandma June says to tell you she is accepting this under protest. Gerald typed back, noted. Then, after a moment, tell her I said she's welcome. Then, after another moment, because he was 61 and not always sure how texting worked, this is Gerald. The reply came, I know it's you, Gerald. And then, she says you're impossible. And then, she also says thank you. The summer went the way summers do in New York, loud and sudden. And then over before you registered it had arrived. Nathan came back in August, and they took Rosie and June to a Yankees game, which June attended under the stated condition that she was not responsible for her reactions if they pulled the starter too early. The Yankees pulled the starter in the 7th inning. June's reactions were, as promised, unrestrained. Rosie ate 3 hot dogs and explained the infield fly rule to Nathan with the patience of someone who had explained it many times. Gerald watched his son lean over and listen to an 11-year-old explain baseball with the same expression Nathan used to have at 8, listening to Gerald explain things, wide-eyed, earnest, filing it away, and felt, under the August sun, in section 214 of Yankee Stadium, a fullness in his chest that he would have been unable to name 3 years ago. He would have been able to name it once before Marlene. He'd just forgotten it was still possible. On the second Thursday of September, Rosie sat down and looked at him with the particular expression she used when she had something to say and was arranging the words. He waited. "Gerald," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes. Why do you keep coming?" She said it plainly. No accusation in it, pure inquiry. "Every Thursday. You have a lot of you're busy, you have meetings and stuff. You didn't have to." She folded her hands. "You didn't have to do any of it." The lawyer, the car for Grandma June, the jacket. A pause. "Why?" Gerald looked at his coffee for a moment. He thought about what Marlene would have said, which was probably something kinder and more graceful than whatever he was going to manage. He thought about the 11 days of silence before that first November Thursday and what they had actually felt like inside them. He thought about a question his wife used to ask him early in their marriage. "Gerald, what are you doing this for?" Not accusatory, just a calibration, a regular check on whether he was living in the direction of things that mattered. He hadn't had anyone to ask him that in 3 years. "Because," he said slowly, "you came upstairs. In November. You were lost and you were trying very hard not to show it. And you shook my hand and told me you didn't have money in the same voice you'd used to give a weather report." He paused. "And then you ate 3 pieces of bread and you made me laugh for the first time in I don't know how long." Rosie looked at him. "You laughed at the beets thing," she said. "Yes, I wasn't trying to be funny." "I know," he said, "or that's what made it funny." She considered this. "So, you kept coming because I made you laugh." "I kept coming," he said carefully, "because you reminded me that there was still a point to things. To breakfast and conversation and knowing someone's name, and—" He stopped because he was 61 and found large emotions more manageable when approached from the side. "You reminded me that Thursdays meant something, that's all." Rosie looked at the table. She traced the edge of her fork with one finger. "My mom used to say that," she said quietly. "That people come into your life right when they need to. Not before, not after. Right when." Gerald nodded. "She was right," he said. Rosie looked up. Her eyes were bright, but she was not going to cry. He knew that about her by now. She would hold herself steady until she was somewhere private, and he respected it. "Okay," she said. She picked up her menu. "I think I want the French toast again." "You always want the French toast. It's really good French toast." "It is," he agreed. The waiter came. Rosie ordered the French toast. Gerald ordered the ribeye, medium rare, black coffee, no dessert, the same as always. The November light came through the east-facing window, familiar and gray, and across the table, an 11-year-old girl with her mother's eyes opened a math textbook and began doing homework between bites. And Gerald Whitfield picked up the Wall Street Journal and turned to page 1. And the restaurant moved around them, and it was an ordinary Thursday, which was, it turned out, everything.